Yeah, it's been years taking a look. Yeah, I'm okay though. Oh, thank you.
One is maybe unmuted. What do we think?
Yeah. So one is this one should be filming the video, and I think we're gonna use a different phone for the audio.
There's this one for the audio, and I think this has to be muted in order for there not to be an echo.
Okay.
I'm not like this is
Testing, testing.
when we have the most extraordinary collection. The I know so traditional to begin our gathering here. Esa Enai, I lift my eyes to the hills. Where will my help come from? My help comes from God, God who is the creator of heavens and the earth, God maker, God who is the one who gives, God who is the one who takes. And as we have just said in the words of blessing in tearing Kriya with this family, Baruch Dayan Haemet, blessed is God, the true judge, at this time of sadness, and yet at this time to celebrate the life of an extraordinary individual. It is the custom to busy ourselves with kavod hamet, with the mitzvah of really engrossing ourselves in the dignity, with the dignity of the deceased. Martin and daughter. That phone there, then people hear you at home too, and that camera. You go first.
Yes. Grandpa, I know you are dead, not you died, but I will always love you. No matter how long we are, the love will always be there. I remember being in the garden.
Good job, Peter. Thank you.
There are few things I want to do less than give tribute to my father, but the unflinching approach to reality he imparted has left me noticing his aging, and I was preparing to adapt over time. But my father never gave someone a challenge he thought them incapable of meeting. All the wonderful things being shared about my father obviously come as no surprise to me, and I'd hope to spend the next few years hearing those things with him. But knowing how uncomfortable it would have made him hear so much as his own ability to act diminished, I appreciate that as all the rest of us, it was something with which he was satisfied. And I hope to spend the next years, I had hoped to spend the next year supporting him as he had always supported me. My father's been at anything I asked him to be at and volunteers for things I didn't intend to step into. And the outpouring of remembrance students and colleagues went out to Cal Poly Pomona for multiple events, marched with my students for a sustainable future and for the rights of immigrants, and were happy to attend the Cal Poly Pomona sponsored Dodger games. Despite his years of public speaking at high stakes events, family members have reminded me of how the event for which he showed some concern for his performance was when he was called upon to officiate my wedding. He saw this as a high stakes event, and I think Naveed would have made even if he hadn't done it perfectly. And the depths of my father's ability to welcome people into his family completely. When you're in, you're in. That was the for better or worse. And with my father, it was almost all better. Father didn't know how to do, and he will have posthumous work published. And that's not a hint to his co-authors or a comment to the reviewers. And number two, you know, I'm looking at you right now. But the idea of slowing down, of doing less, of relaxing, not at all more the fifth time, he was finally finding the time to research our family history, finding a master's thesis on one relative, connecting with ethnomusicologists while researching a family melody. He was He never binged anything on Netflix, but he wasn't quite as out of touch with popular culture as we used to joke. I remember the two films he took me to that he told me will change how movies are made were 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars. The vacation with my father was not per se relaxing, but it was always very educational. There were museums to see, history to be learned, culture to be appreciated. I can imagine a trip to him despite the train museum. We certainly have exchanged our share of dark political humor over the years and have had plenty of opportunity over the last few. But he also would go long game on humor in a way I don't think most people ever knew. When my brother was roughly 8 years old, and he was very important to my father. So the old Chalice comedy skit being done by HBO, he thought it was hysterical. And an 8-year-old with my brother and my father smiled. He made a few too many jokes about the chalice, begging my father to reenact the skit for him. My father, good natured, used as a joke at my first wedding. Technical difficulties. Over the years, once in a while, my dad would bring that up to my brother. And fast forward to 2004, when Steve and Shirley's wedding, when my father got up to give the toast, he actually opened with the exact same largely innocuous lines of the skit. The look on my brother's face was priceless. Of course, my father proceeded. My father rooting for the underdog Brooklyn Dodgers. And many of you who have attended games could have mistaken him for teetotal, as he almost never enjoyed a beer at a game. Why? Because once during a restroom break, he missed a triple play. Fortunately, he stayed in his seat for the 1988 for Gibson's home run, and as a Brooklyn Dodger fan, he saw most of the greats play live, including Jackie Robinson. He also took me to some pretty amazing baseball games, and thanks to his busy travel schedule, I was frequently the lucky recipient of tickets, even when he couldn't attend. My first Dodger game went into extra innings, and the Dodgers won on a hit by Steve Garvey, because we don't leave early in my family. And since we never leave early, we were at the game where the Dodgers hit 4 home runs in a row in the ninth, though we also suffered through a game where they blew a 13-run lead. I was at Oral Hershiser's first start as a Dodger, and since this was at Shea Stadium, we went with the now somewhat traitorous but still beloved Uncle Harold, who had defected to Mets fandom when the Dodgers moved. My father stayed true, because that's who he was, always loyal. And we've seen more than one win by pitchers like Valenzuela and Kershaw. I got 18 innings of World Series baseball in one game. And no, I did not leave early. And I rode my bike. Despite his impressive personal achievements, he told me more than once that the real influence he had and what he was most proud of were the people he had the privilege of working with, educating, and developing. He told me not very many people read academic papers, but the influence we have is not only in the scholars we train, but the many students who don't become scholars, who go into the world carrying what we teach them, the messages, the values, the ideas, and the ways of thinking that we impart. He saw himself fundamentally allowed him to remain true to himself, his ideals, and his values. Because what he most valued were people. And being an educator wasn't a one-way street. He valued what students brought and he integrated it into his own thinking. And as a result, he never stopped growing. He never stopped. That was the real value of being an educator, the opportunity to expand people's minds and in turn have your own expanded. Recently, I had the wonderful privilege of two of my former students returning to a guest lecture for our annual Professor for a Day campus event. I had them speak about research and had this deeply unique view of reach my father's voice in their room. People that critically evaluated long-term planning. That was effectively the mantra.
Sharing such touching memories of Father Faith. Thank you, Zia, too. Thank you representing your family. And I'll share with you too that Navid, I want to say, since you're represented here by Faye and Zia, that it's worth saying that the strength and the love that you bring to faith was something that Mark so appreciated represented in the work. Now it's an opportunity for Steve and Leia to come forward. Your word as well.
I yes. I'm going to submit some geography stuff and counting all the cool things way off. Thank you for all the time you helped me with my homework and for teaching me by leading the speech on Shabbat. Papa, I am always going to laugh at the funny story you told me about when you were in the army. It was target practice time, and you missed every shot you took. When you received your results, you got 100% because the person next to you hit all of your targets perfectly. Papa, thank you for all the laughs and thank you for being the best Papa. Love, Leia. P.S. Don't worry about Wobble. We will take great care of her.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Wachs. I'm Marty's son. And one thing he did bless me with was a really strong set of lungs. So hopefully I can speak up over the exterior noise. We actually had some military helicopters fly by. My dad spent some time in the military. That wasn't planned, but it was quite a bonus. So I must say, it's pretty intimidating being asked to speak first, except we did some moving around and I got to speak second. I'm speaking at a funeral where the officiant is actually both a rabbi and a cantor, a crabbi, or a rancher, as she shared with us. Also speaking today are the winner of the George Hart Award for Outstanding Leadership at Cal Poly Pomona, the director of the Institute of Transportation Studies, and the author of The High Cost of Free Parking. Then there's me. I was the one Marty picked up from the principal's office. You know, I've spent so much time over the last few days talking about how my father died. So it's such an honor to come to you today and talk about how he lived. Whenever I meet people who knew my father, they assume our dinner conversations were about urban planning and what an incredible resource my father was. And I'm here to say, although congestion pricing and high-speed rail did come up, it wasn't the only thing we discussed. Marty talked about the time he spent as a camp counselor at a summer camp for children with special needs. He was as proud of himself for teaching a hemophiliac how to work a buzzsaw at this summer camp as he was for any of his academic accomplishments. And he had great mentors, but they weren't the mentors you'd actually expect Marty to reference. One of the best mentors that affected Marty's career was the family of Virgil Wilson. And I'd like to ask Marty's colleagues, it's okay, don't be embarrassed, and his former students that are here, do you know who Virgil Wilson was? When Marty was in the Army, he accompanied an Army chaplain to the home of Virgil Wilson. And the chaplain had to let them know that Virgil had been killed in Vietnam. They lived in a dirt floor shack in rural Maryland on the Eastern Shore. And after the chaplain broke the news, my father had to sit and make the arrangements with Virgil's family. Virgil's father said to Marty, "I am so proud that Virgil died doing something for his country." And Marty, with the most serious face I've ever seen, looked at me, I was 10, and he said, "Virgil's country never did anything for him." And when we went to the Vietnam War Memorial, we looked up Virgil's name. And it's because of moments like those that what we really should talk about is not only what my father did professionally, but who he was personally. My father was proud to be from an entire generation. He wasn't the only one. And Marty knew he wasn't the only one. But he came from a generation of people whose parents were immigrants, whose parents didn't attend college, who came from humble beginnings and they made great lives for themselves. And Marty didn't feel special because he overcame the poverty he grew up in. He felt special because he was part of that entire movement. Marty's father was a cab driver and a limousine driver. Marty grew up on the 4th floor of a walk-up apartment building. And if you know anything about Jewish families, they take forever to say goodbye. When he would walk his relatives from the 4th floor apartment down to the street level, it would be daylight when they left the apartment, and it would be nighttime by the time they got to the street. That's how Marty grew up. He was the kid on the 4th floor walk-up that went on to have the success in life and the career that he did. So it genuinely enraged Marty, my father, that as the years have gone on, the opportunities for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have become more scarce and more difficult. Over the last few years, we've seen a rise in racism. We've seen a rise in anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia. And it was very difficult for him to talk about these issues because they genuinely didn't make sense to him. He cognitively could not process the flawed logic and bigotry. So in his honor, what I'd like to do this morning is make a call to action. Please use the rest of this week to honor my father with your words. But please take the rest of your days to remember my father with your works. Please engage in creating opportunities for the marginalized. Please create opportunities for people's mobility, which in urban planning is both literal and figurative. That's what Marty would want. And I chose to do some light reading this week. I chose to look at Transportation for the Elderly, a book my father wrote and was published in 1979. And I had to laugh because on the cover it says, changing lifestyles, changing needs. And I don't know if you know this about Marty, but he hated slogans. This was probably the last time he used any sort of slogan in his life. However, there was one slogan he was proud of that's related to what I talked about earlier, about him being part of that generation whose parents didn't go to college and their children became college professors and their children went on to do great things in their lives. The one thing that my dad used to say, the one slogan he allowed himself to use, they took the boy out of the Bronx, but they never took the Bronx out of the boy. Rest in peace, Dad.
Stephen and Leah, I so appreciate your beautifully crafted words and memory and the light reading that you did to prepare for it. And surely, I know Marty loved you deeply, and I'm sure that your missing him is pained as well. And it's an incredible thing that I thought the next thing I would be officiating with your family would be Leah's bat mitzvah. And here we are instead saying this goodbye first. And I am blown away by the depths of your family's commitment to one another. And I know that will shine through even in this year of grief. And I wish you continued strength, all of you, and especially you, Leah, as you continue your studies to bat mitzvah. And now we turn to friends, because Marty kept great company. And I'm not going to read CVs or use titles because then we'd be here all day. So instead, I'll just say that we invite Donald to say a few words about his friend Marty.
There was no one I admire or respect more than Marty Wachs, and I am grateful to Helen for honoring me with the chance to say so today. I telephoned Marty on Saturday afternoon, and he was cheerful and optimistic, as always. By a wonderful coincidence, that morning I looked at a word quiz on the web, and the question was, what adjective contains the letter S, P, and F? That means possessing or expressing great sagacity. I guess the right word was sapient, and then looked at its synonyms, which are wise, sage, insightful, judicious, prudent, sensible, and sane. When I saw this string of words, they immediately made me think of Martin. And fortunately, I told him that during our telephone conversation. We usually don't have the opportunity to tell our friends how much we admire and respect them. And I am thankful to have been able to tell Marty this collection of words that reminded me of it. He received this compliment with his characteristic good humor. The outpouring of praise and gratitude for Marty on the web this week is absolutely overwhelming. And his former students frequently use many more adjectives to describe Marty's virtues, such as brilliant, inspirational, amazing, generous, kind, caring, and ethical. In addition to having all these virtues and more, Marty was always witty and cheerful. Marty has done so much in so many different fields that most of us know only a small part of all that he accomplished. The tributes flow again are helping us to see many facets of these accomplishments previously unknown to us. The transportation profession heaped on Marty every award it could get, sometimes twice. His writing was apparently simple and straightforward, but often what he said had not previously occurred to anyone else. Marty was an especially gifted teacher, and he surely has done more for young people than anyone else in the field of transportation planning. In addition, I think Marty has done more for older people than anyone else. Although I'm older than Marty, I always thought of him as my mentor. I had two great mentors in my life, Marty Wachs and Harvey Furlow. Together, they set examples that many of us have tried to follow. As one of Marty's PhD students said, when I grow up, I want to be like Marty Wachs. Those of us who were lucky to work with both Marty Wachs and Harvey Furlow have had the best possible models for lives well lived. Marty was not only the perfect professor of urban planning, but Marty and Helen were the perfect couple. Marty and Helen, along with their children, Faye and Steve, were also the perfect family. As Mae West said, you only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. Marty did it right. I am more grateful than I can say that he came into and will always remain part of my life. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for sharing those blessings of friendship. Call on another friend now. We'll call on Marty's friend Brian to also share some memories of their relationship.
It's a tremendous honor to be here, but such a sad occasion. I've only received one standing ovation in my life, and it was for Marty Wachs. It was 1996, and Marty had decided to decamp from UCLA after a quarter of a century and moved to UC Berkeley to head the Transportation Center headquartered there. We held an event to wish Marty well on his move north. You know, the sort of thing that typically entails cake and some gifts and a few impromptu speeches in the conference room down the hall. In this case, we had a party at the Museum of Flying, and several hundred of Marty's students, former students, colleagues, and friends showed up. The standing ovation came when I recounted a conversation I had with one of Marty's UCLA colleagues about him, a conversation I'll retell now. I was about a year into my PhD program in urban planning at UCLA when Marty was my advisor. This other faculty member asked me, "How's your program going so far?" "Just fine," I said. "So how do you like working with Marty?" he asked. "It's great," I told him. "He's so supportive and generous with his time. I feel like I lucked out." "Well," he told me somewhat ominously, "Marty can seem warm and engaging and generous at first." He paused. "But after you get to know him, really know him, and peel back those layers of the onion, you know what you will find underneath?" I shook my head. "You will find," he concluded, "an even nicer, more caring, and more generous person." As I relayed that story back in 1996, the hundreds in attendance who had also discovered that even nicer, even more caring, and more generous Marty underneath spontaneously rose to their feet and applauded. So while Martin Wachs was an enormously important transportation scholar, a gifted teacher, and an accomplished leader, it was his more fundamental quality of being a profoundly good person that made him such a great man. But his many accomplishments do warrant noting as they're so notable. So let me just offer a very partial list here. Marty was among the first transportation engineering scholars to focus on the social dimensions of travel. He did pioneering work on travel by the elderly that became his first book that Steve referred to. And it was a topic he continued to work on to the present day. He used to joke that he was aging into becoming the subject of his own research. And in fact, he was co-author of a paper on travel by the elderly with former UCLA student, PhD student Andy Scouten, and current doctoral student Hannah King, and my wife and UCLA faculty member Evelyn Blumenberg, that was presented at a conference the day he passed away. Another area of Marty's influential scholarship concerned access, which is a concept distinct from mobility, and today is all the rage in transportation planning. Dozens of papers and books on Axis have come out in just the last couple of years. To say that Marty was ahead of his time on this topic would be putting it mildly. Many of these recent papers cite his article, Physical Accessibility as a Social Indicator, which was one of the first on the topic when it was published 48 years ago. These are just a couple of examples, but Marty's influence as a transportation scholar on planning ethics, on travel behavior, on transportation finance, and as a policy influencer for his work with the bus riders union civil rights lawsuit, as a member of the California State High-Speed Rail Peer Review Committee, are equally consequential and will continue to influence thinking and practice for a long time. But more broadly, I considered Marty to be the model of what a college professor should be. And I'm not alone in this, obviously. Well, it's not hard to find top scholars in the academy, and excellent teachers are plentiful as well. And there are even a few talented managers and leaders. Only the rarest of professors are exceptional scholars and gifted teachers and inspiring leaders like Marty. But as much as Marty cared about transportation scholarship, teaching and practice, as much as he loved gardening and UCLA basketball and classical music, it may be only his family for him that ranked ahead of his beloved Dodgers. Them bums abandoned Brooklyn and Marty in 1958, but they never left his heart. And were reunited when Marty joined the UCLA faculty in 1971. And this last fall, his Dodgers finally were crowned again as world champions after 32 long years. Marty's love of the Dodgers was endearing, even beguiling, and infectious. Of all of Marty's influences over my life and my household's life, the most curious may be baseball and the Dodgers. Frankly, and I can say this now, I've always found baseball to be a rather dull competitor to my first love of basketball. But over the years, I trooped off to dozens of games with Marty, usually with Evie and Helen as well. These games provided opportunities for me to share with Marty my many ideas on ways to improve what he considered to be an utterly perfect game. Why can't more than one player stand on a base at a time, I would ask? Or what's with tagging up? Why can't you just run when the ball's hit? Or why do runners have to stay in the base paths? Wouldn't it be great to see them run all over the field to avoid a tag? Marty would always pretend he didn't hear this blasphemy. The one time, and this is the closest I ever remembered him being visibly annoyed with me, he told me, "It's hard for me to focus on the game when you never stop talking about changing it." Ouch. But I deserved that, given that I once attended a Twins game in the Metrodome in Minnesota and wrote Marty a postcard from there that read, quote, "Under the lights, indoors, on AstroTurf, and with the designated hitter. Baseball, the way it was meant to be." But Marty's passion for the game and for the Dodgers was infectious, particularly with Evie. So infectious that we now find ourselves, and I'm embarrassed to say this, watching regular season Dodger games on TV. What better evidence could there be that Marty could do almost anything? But of all the remarkable aspects of Marty, I submit that his most enduring legacy, after being a loving husband and father, was as a teacher and mentor. As others have noted, one would be hard-pressed to find an academic anywhere who was as committed to and supportive of his students as Marty. Even the greenest undergraduate garnered his respect and seemingly limitless patience and generosity. And in turn, few professors have inspired more deep and enduring loyalty among their students than Marty. I once asked Marty when he finally stopped worrying about his two terrific kids, and he replied to me, "Well, as soon as I do, I'll be sure to let you know." That caring concern extended to his hundreds of academic kids as well. He was always sharing with me the triumphs and tribulations of so many of his former students. I was amazed he could keep track of them all. But I want to note that mentoring did not stop when he retired, the first, second, third, or I don't know, fourth time as it was discussed. 2 months ago, I learned that Marty had separately met with a couple of our students on a regular basis to help them prepare for a major exam. This would not normally be so unusual, except that Marty wasn't even on their exam committees. He just cared about these students and wanted to see them do well, which they did. 2 weeks ago, Marty reached out to me and said he wanted to meet. We set up a Zoom meeting, and on it, he told me he was concerned about a former student who had left our program a decade earlier. He wanted to write the former student a note of encouragement, but was worried his message might come across as pushy. So he asked me if I would read a draft of the message and give him comments on it to make sure he got the tone just right. Who does this? Marty. Over the past few days, my email inbox has been overflowing with unsolicited messages like this one from a senior government official who I knew by reputation but did not know she had studied with Marty. She wrote, "I heard the sad news about Professor Wachs. I'm so sorry. He made such a difference in my life. I was new to this country when I joined his program, and he guided me not only as a teacher and a mentor, but as a parent as well. It's a big loss. I just wanted to write this to you. I just wanted to write this to you. He made such a difference in my life." Many of you have looked at and contributed to the webpage we set up where current and former students and colleagues can offer their thoughts on Marty. One of the most common comments posted says something to the effect of, "I don't know where I would be today if it were not for Marty Wachs." What's all the more impressive in reading through these comments are the number of people who consider Marty one of their most important mentors who never studied with him. With respect to me, I was fortunate to study with Marty, to collaborate with him on research projects and classes, and to eventually call him a dear friend. And I can say for certain, I do not know where I would be today if it were not for Martin Wachs. What I do know, however, is that our world and our corner of the academy is now an emptier place without him. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of those personal remembrances and for sharing on behalf of UCLA as well. It's wonderful to hear. To Helen and Faye and Naveed and Dia, Steve and Shirley, and Leah, to Lee, to all those who are gathered here in person and virtually as well, we are here with you in your grief as you begin the mourning process for your dear husband, father, and grandfather, and brother, Martin Wachs, Mordechai ben Rachmiel Udvora. I'm told that Marty was made to sit through what amounted to living eulogies, recalling his extraordinary impact on the world, much to his tremendous embarrassment. You heard about a few of them. Marty, who walked through this world girded with humility and modesty, a great man who kept great company, who did not need to make his mastery and excellence known. Today, we celebrate you unapologetically, Marty. Your legacy as a parent, a partner, and a teacher is far too big and too golden to be contained. There's a teaching of the prophet Micha, often cited as an aspirational pathway for life. Higid lecha adam ma tov, uma Adonai doresh mimcha. Ki im asot mishpat v'ahavat chesed v'etznei lechet im Elohecha. They have told you, God, they have told you, man, what is good and what God requires of you. Only to do justice and to love loving kindness and to walk modestly with your God. There's a beautiful gloss on this text that comes out of 15th century Salonika that takes this threefold construct and turns it into a relational directive, that it's possible to achieve wholeness, first by fulfilling one's duties to oneself, then by fulfilling one's duties to others, and then finally by fulfilling one's duties to God. As I listen to you, Marty's family, describe the shlemut, the wholeness with which he departed this world, that he wanted to go out on top
And he did. I see these geological layers of service to self and to others and to the divine spirit of the universe in the kindnesses he did throughout his lifetime of devoted service. Marty was born in 1941 to an American-born mother and an immigrant father from whom he inherited a sweet and thoughtful spirit and demeanor. That branch of the family was high achieving. All of Marty's father's siblings worked to create opportunities for themselves, and he was no exception. Marty fell close to the tree, a good student in a great school, in a special progress class. He headed to the Bronx High School of Science and then to City College for Science, specifically for civil engineering. And as Faye mentioned, Marty was uncertain about his path. He happened to very much like sociology and the social sciences as well, and he thought an aptitude test would lead him to the right vocation. But sure enough, the test yielded an even split, and Marty stuck with the field of civil engineering, in which he would become a giant and a teacher to so many. Marty had other loves beyond academia. With his perfect pitch, he played piano extraordinarily well. He loved music, both classical and folk, and I'm told that music would often accompany him during his gardening stints, which he also enjoyed. As a boy, he learned to love the Brooklyn Dodgers and inherited passion from his dear Uncle Harold, who was a tender influence on his life and whom he sweetly resembled. Marty learned great lessons from his uncle and from those games, like never use the bathroom while the Dodgers are at bat, or else you might miss a triple play. And of course, he loved Helen. The story of their partnership of 57 years is intertwined with the story of Marty's career, as so much of his life was and is bound up with education. They met at the Model UN, where Marty was posted up taking attendance to meet women, according to Helen. She remembers that she was 13 when they met because he bought her a jewelry box for her 14th birthday and promised her he would fill it. And he did. After dating on and off, they reunited for good, just as Marty headed off to Northwestern on a Walter P. Murphy Fellowship full ride, and that's when they married. Marty pursued his doctorate. Helen went for a master's in history. Hard at work in his doctoral studies, Marty was afraid he might be called up for Vietnam and he'd be pulled away from his studies. The university promised him 3 years to finish with no disruptions, and sure enough, he finished, which meant that he was quite the young man with quite the status when he was called to active duty. And Marty was offered a job with high status to stay in the Army, promising him to send him to Vietnam so that he would come back a major. But ever the convincing diplomat, Marty spoke his truth. Sir, as much as the Army means to you, teaching means to me. You see, Marty had been deeply moved by his best teacher, Professor of Engineering, Joseph Pistrang. He knew what it meant to be a good teacher, and he wanted to be one. And he was. He won the Distinguished Teaching Award in 1986, a tribute to the impact he had on many students and careers. He was the willing third author on over 47 papers, and he took enormous pride in supervising his students. Reading through the tributes written just this week by his UCLA students and colleagues, I rode the swell of his tidal contribution to countless lives. He was, in the words of so many, a source of great inspiration who understood how to build things in every sense of the word. And while he taught and coached and mentored, he also built a family. Becoming a father just made Marty, in the words of his family, more Marty. And as his kids grew, so did his closeness with them. And nothing they asked of him was too much. Faye and Steve, you each spoke of your father with an admixture of love and respect and laughter that belies the affection you had not only for Marty, but for his work and for his way of being. Faye, you recalled how he wouldn't have known how to do nothing. Even a vacation with your father was another opportunity to learn. Marty, being Marty, his whole self and nothing but himself. It is possible to achieve wholeness, first by fulfilling one's duties to oneself, then by fulfilling one's duties to others, and finally by fulfilling one's duties to God. When I think about the path that Marty walked through the world, this consistent and trademark way of being quietly brilliant, I understand better the teaching of the prophet Micha through the lens of the Akedat Yitzchak. It's the last piece, the idea of fulfilling one's duties to God, that comes into sharper relief when tested through the example of a real life mensch like Marty. The parallel piece of Micha is Hatzneat lechet im Adonai Elohecha. In other words, you discharge your duties to God, to the divine, by doing the first two pieces, serving your own needs and others in the way of being humble and discreet and unpresuming. And now we become students of Marty's legacy, inheritors of all that he researched, and any papers still forthcoming, and most of all, this path that he chose to walk, the love he lived out and entrusted with his dear Helen, the enduring love and blessings that he found in his dear children, and then in the next generation with Leah and Zia, the love and compassion and gentle, principled cynicism he practiced with every student and class. These are left for us to study, admire, and appreciate. And we pray that his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Yehi zichro baruch. May his memory be for an eternal blessing. It's at this time that we have the opportunity to follow in his footsteps of doing loving kindnesses by doing the ultimate loving kindness. It's called the chesed shel emet, to bury the deceased. Going to give an opportunity first to the family, to the immediate family, and then to all those gathered here afterwards to come forward. I want to explain to you how this chesed takes place, and also just a little bit about how the Memorial Park has asked us to do this in COVID times. According to Jewish tradition, we don't want to do this in the usual way because this is not a usual practice. We are reluctant to do this burial. So I'll ask that each individual come forward. The family might choose to do this with actual handfuls of dirt, or you could take up a shovel. I'll ask that you take it out of the dirt, and the first shovelful should take place awkwardly on the back of the spade, and after that, at least two more shovelfuls regularly into the grave site. 3, shlemut, the wholeness, the completeness of the act is usually 3 shovelfuls. If you'd like to do more, you might. Please do take care to keep 6 feet of distance, even if you are vaccinated at this time. We want to do that just for the safety of others. Please remain masked. Keep the distance between others. There's sanitizer and I believe gloves as well in the back. And we'll ask for the immediate family to have the opportunity to come forward first. And then the next one, and turn it over. Exactly. Show the lesson, then it's not a couple projects that you would give them the audit of it, the election. Yeah, it's an odd thing. First time I ever saw people do it with actual handfuls this year, and it felt shocking to me at first. But I've learned the process. Yeah, before COVID. Yeah. And now, sometimes in COVID, or even with lessons in trouble because the whole my 15 minutes service. That doesn't so
the dirt from the continued action, which is interesting. Mm. Anyone else would like to come forward and participate in the burial, I invite you to line up. Just please do keep distance between each family pod. Turn to concluding this service. I'll call everybody's attention now. At this time, there's one more piece that we include in the funeral service. That's a part of the mitzvah collection for Kavod Hametz, for the dignity of the deceased. This is the first time in which we'll say an El Malei Rachamim, a memorial prayer for Martin, Mordechai ben Rachmiel Udvorah. It's a prayer that can be said anytime that's visited the grave. It's a prayer that will be said on his yard site, the anniversary of his death. A prayer that will be said at the Yisplor memorial services whenever they're attended in his memory. And this is the first time we'll say it. And I'll ask anybody who's able and comfortable to please rise. And I'll recite it in his honor.
Kedoshim Ashmarim, Kizor Haraki Hamazirim, Et Nishmat Mordechai ben Rachmiel Udvorah, Shalach Leholamo, Bigan Hazim Tehimilu Kato, Anabalarachamim. Hasirehu Seichak Nafetali Olamim Utzor Vitzorachayim It's Nishmaito Adonai Unachalato Vianu Hach B'Shalom Hamishkevo V'Nomar Amin. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Marty, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful one, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. And if you're comfortable remaining standing, please do so, because we turn now to a new mitzvah. And it's one that the family has respite from, and the rest of us now take responsibility for. It's called Nichum Avelim, comforting the mourners. You, the ones wearing the torn ribbons, and you who are adjacent to the krovim, the close ones of the deceased. You're in Avelut. You're mourners now. You have buried someone for whom you cared deeply. And now it's our opportunity to take care of you, of your basic needs, so that in the most immediate future, what you are most busy with is your love and your grief and your memories and your stories. And the first act that we get to do is to say Amen to your mourner's Kaddish. This is the first mourner's Kaddish said in honor of Marty. It's a prayer that affirms God's love and compassion and power. It can be found in the booklets if you're holding it on page 4 and 5. And I'll recite it with you slowly so that we can all do it together. And if you feel comfortable joining in at the parts that say Amen, if you're not reciting the Kaddish along with the mourners, please do. You can do so from home as well if you're joining us virtually. Let's do it together. Yitkadam, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Yama, Zibra, Pirute, Siamlis, Malte, V'chayepon, V'yomepon, U'chaye, Devol, Beit Yisrael, Ma'agala, U'bizman, Hariv, V'imru, Amen. Yehi, Shemei Rabbah, Levarach, Le'elam, Lamei, Omaya. Yitvara, V'yishtaha, V'yipa'ar, V'yishramam, V'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, V'yitale, V'yitalal, Shemei D'Kudusha, B'richu. Le'ela Minkol Virtata V'shirata, Tushbevata V'nesamata, Damiran Ve'oma V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya. V'chaim Aleinu Ve'okol Yisrael V'imru, Amen. Oseh Shalom V'roma, Ya'aseh Shalom. Aleinu Ve'okol Yisrael V'imru, Amen. I'll invite the immediate family to be seated for a moment. We're about to conclude. In just a moment, I'm going to ask everybody who's able to do this on their way out to join me in making 2 widely spaced, about 10 feet apart lines. Well, space yourself out between those 2 large green pieces of equipment or so, heading in parallel lines perpendicular to the road there. I'll place myself towards the end. The idea is that we're creating a pathway, a wide pathway through which the family will pass. And as they pass through, I'll say the traditional words of comfort. You're welcome to join me in repeating after me. We'll ask Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avilei Tzion B'Yerushalayim, that God be a comfort to them among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. But if there are other words of comfort that come to mind in any language, you can offer them, because this is a moment to offer the first words of comfort as a part of that mitzvah. Just a couple more things to mention, which is that there's going to be a Zoom opportunity tonight at 7 p.m. and that link was sent out through the Temple Beth Am community, and I'm sure there are other means as well by the family. There are other private Zoom Shiva opportunities with the family. Please stay in touch with them in whatever way you found out about this funeral. I'm sure you'll find out also about the Shiva opportunities as needed. And I'll also say one final thing, which is that whoever you are, whether you're among the Avelim in this family or whether you took time out of your day to be here with them, you've come close to death today by being here, perhaps by placing your hands on the dirt. The custom that without any additional blessing, there's a simple ritual of washing one's hands, either by stopping at the exit of this memorial park at the fountains that you'll see near the exit, or in fact, I think there's even one just along here, or just the next opportunity you have to be near running water. There's no blessing associated with it except just to rinse some running water over your hands to remind yourself that you're returning to the world of the living. It reminds me about the first command that goes to the person who is in mourning, which is that we are tempted when we come so close to death to our minds sort of associate ourselves with the deceased. We find ourselves kind of relating to the deceased in that way. It's easy to find ourselves in the mindset and thinking about this place and all the things that come along with this place, the memories of it and the future here as well. But we are returning to the land of the living. And as Steve so beautifully said, we have charges to follow through on and life to go on with. We have duties to discharge and we have challenges to face in our lives today. And that means that we need to wash our hands and eat and sleep and rest. And that means for you, the Avelim, and it means for us to take care of you by bringing you food and bringing you good tidings and sitting with you and comforting you and being with you. So the first act is just to rinse our hands off and to go on with our days. So with that instruction and that injunction, and with wishes for love and strength, I'm going to invite everybody but the immediate family to join me if you're able and comfortable
making those two wide lines so that we have plenty of space, leaving still 6 feet of space, please, between pods, even as we make those lines, so that we can have the family pass through us. As soon as we line up, please do come between us. And we thank you for joining us if you are joining on the Zoom as well. You're welcome to make any announcements we're going to make.
Yeah, I'm not a friend.
Pretty people sweet.
Oh, wow. So much. I know it's a terrible drug, not right. So, devastated.
On behalf of my folks, thank you.
Want to leave her off? I brought one for you. Here. There's some fountains in the end.
You want to open up, you got a door?